Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. We discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we have a jam-packed episode. But before we get into it, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. Remember, we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest pages on YouTube when it comes to covering the Orlando Magic. So smash that like button and hit subscribe. But now, let's get into today's episode. And the theme of the beginning of this episode is going to be the Orlando Magic being snubbed a little bit. A lot of the offseason, we've talked about the Orlando Magic gaining the favor of ESPN analysts and other basketball analysts across television and across radio, kind of hyping up what the Orlando Magic are slowly but surely becoming. But these first two topics are going to focus around the idea that maybe people are not as sold on the Orlando Magic just yet as we would have hoped, as we would have thought, given everything that they did this offseason. And we're going to start with the NBA schedule and how the Orlando Magic are not featured for either of the two major releases for the NBA schedule, being opening night and Christmas Day. Now, for opening night, understandably so, the matchups that are involved include the Houston Rockets facing off against the Oklahoma City Thunder, where the Thunder will get their NBA championship rings and get their NBA championship rings as well as their banner unveiled. And the other matchup being the LeBron James led Los Angeles Lakers with Luka Doncic, now coming off of an offseason where he's the most talked about individual in sports when it comes to fitness, it seems, and Golden State, which of course has Steph Curry. And of course, the old opening night aspect of this is more so meant to highlight the battle between Stephen Curry and LeBron James, something that we may have only 1 to 2 more years maximum of being able to see down the line. But the Christmas Day game is the Christmas Day slates, excuse me, are the ones that's a little bit more interesting. This article points out something that's very important. Shout out to Orlando Magic Daily, as we always do, that says the Christmas Day schedule also lacks Eastern Conference teams. The Cleveland Cavaliers and New York Knicks will open the Christmas Day schedule, but the rest of the games feature Western Conference teams. It might be that kind of season. The Eastern Conference might be the secondary player in this story this season, and that means the Magic might be left out in the cold again. This is referencing the idea that for the Christmas Day slate, pretty much outside of the two top teams in the East, the entire rest of the Eastern Conference is completely neglected and not featured in any other matchup. And the Orlando Magic being considered the third best team in the Eastern Conference by many, and we've said this on a multitude of occasions, not just from the perspective of analysts, but even sports books are putting the Orlando Magic as the third best team in the Eastern Conference on paper right now, and the eighth best team in betting odds to win the championship, behind only, yet again, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks. So with that being the case, it seems as though the Orlando Magic are still in a bit of a prove-it mode, and understandably so, right? The move of adding Desmond Bane is not necessarily so star-studded that it makes you feel a certain type of way about this team from a glitz and glamour standpoint, the same way the Lakers or the Golden State Warriors or even what the Houston Rockets look like now adding Kevin Durant. It's not the same as that. Obviously, adding Tyus Jones in free agency isn't going to set antennas up for anybody. That's not just like a real hoop head that knows that Tyus Jones is a near double digit vet in the NBA that can be a very serviceable player and can bring a lot of not just positivity to your team, but can bring a lot of championship level aura to your team as a guy who just, although he has not won a championship, plays that kind of way. He plays a good brand of basketball, I guess is the best way to say it. I think the other thing that's taken into account is something we've discussed on the podcast before, which is that the Orlando Magic also need to show everyone that they're deserving of playing in big games. Again, 1-6 in nationally televised games last season, multiple blowout losses of 30 plus, both on the road and at home. So this is a team that's particularly because I don't think they would be the team that we featured on opening night, just given the fact that the matchups that are there, marquee matchups, very understandable the ones that they did go with. But the Christmas Day game or not or the lack thereof for the Orlando Magic, I think is a representation of the fact that people need to see them play well against some of the better teams with this new iteration of their squad or let's say this improved iteration of their squad. Because 1-6 in nationally televised games and getting blown out by teams like a la the Cleveland Cavaliers in those situations shows that this team still has a ways to go. I don't necessarily think that the Orlando Magic were I don't necessarily know if the Orlando Magic were deserving of getting either of these slots, but I do believe that they're a good enough team in the picture of what is going on in the NBA to be at least considered for one of these slots. I think the NBA is just simply recognizing the fact that the Eastern Conference is going to be down by a significant margin. If they believed in teams like the Philadelphia 76ers, for example, I think that Philly versus Orlando would have been a really solid matchup, given the fact that you could bank on Apollo Banchero versus Joel Embiid matchup being something that could be promoted as two MVP caliber candidates going back and forth with one another with good co-stars in Franz Wagner and Paul George, along with Tyrese Maxey being guarded by Jalen Suggs. Right? See, there's a perfect storyline aspect right there with the Eastern Conference if the NBA up top, talking about the front office people and the people like Adam Silver, believed more in the context around the Eastern Conference this upcoming season. But with everything across the board being viewed as like the East is going to be down this year, you see that they only get one really featured matchup, and it's against the two best, quote unquote, considered teams in the East, rather than kind of giving some other star power to players and teams like the Orlando Magic. So, snubbed off the opening night and Christmas Day slates, but a team that I think this season could really earn themselves a spot in this situation season later. So going into 2026, 2027, I think that the Orlando Magic have a really good chance to be featured on one of those nights. Let's go to my next snub list, which was Bleacher Report recently dropped a Big Three rankings on their site. And although they did not go in depth, they did not do all 30 teams in terms of doing their Big Three rankings. They did do five main teams, and they did a handful of honorable mentions. I will share all of this with you now. For the honorable mentions, they have Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Austin Reeves, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, and OG Anunoby, Stephen Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green. And then they move into their main list being at number 5, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and Bradley Beal. The Houston Rockets' new Big Three with Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, and Amen Thompson. And then the Big Three left over, or the handful of Big Threes left over, I'm going to let you guys tap in to the actual article itself to figure out who the top 3 are. I'm sure that a lot of you could probably guess. Leave your guesses in the comment section down below if you want to try and take a stab at it before reading the article itself. But all I can tell you is I listed off a handful of Big Threes. The Orlando Magic Big Three of Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs was not included in that list. Now, where would they land at? I would say because the fact that this list did not go 10 deep, I would say that's going to be the leeway that I give Bleacher Report for not featuring the Orlando Magic. Because I feel as though if this list is 10 deep, that 9 or 10 spot is where the Orlando Magic Big Three should be at. I believe that at worst, that is where the Orlando Magic Big Three should be landed at. Now, according to this list, they've only given 8 names or 8 teams Big Threes. So there's still 2 spaces left. I believe that this Orlando Magic team, with those 3 guys, is good enough because you could also interchange your Big Three. You could call the third guy in the Big Three Desmond Bane instead of Jalen Suggs. That's another option as well. And maybe part of the reason that that's not ranked on this list or ranked in their honorable mentions is because we've not seen Desmond Bane, who maybe with the star power of Desmond Bane is more considered to be that third guy in the Big Three, and we haven't seen him play with this group yet. Also a fair point. I think that this Orlando Magic team's Big Three is either 9 or 10, and I think when you look at some of the honorable mentions, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, and OG Anunoby, I think that our Big Three is on par with them. I think that the Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Austin Reeves Big Three, I think that's an interesting one when you give the fact that Luka Doncic is a really, really, really solid player. MVP caliber player, right? All pro player. LeBron James still an all pro caliber player. Just finished on NBA's all NBA third team, I believe. Austin Reeves, he might be the one bringing it down, but not by much because Austin Reeves is a very solid player that has also raised his game in the postseason in a real way. Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green, historically, all of these players individually represent something very dangerous. Together, really strong group. But do I think that the Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bain, and or Jalen Suggs trifecta is on par with that? Yes, I do. I genuinely do. I even think that they're on par with the Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and Bradley Beal combination. And the reason why I think that that should be pointed out, in particularly along with the Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, Amin Thompson, um, names are because neither one of those groups have played all together. So although they may be factoring in a certain level of chemistry or trying to determine which of Desmond Bain or Jalen Suggs will be considered the third of Orlando's big three, I think that if we're just factoring in fit amongst three lead players for a team, yeah, I think that Orlando's trifecta is on par. Maybe from a talent perspective, the Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, Amin Thompson leap is a little high just because of what Kevin Durant represents, what Alperen Sengun has already been, and then what Amin Thompson as a two-way player has the effect on the how he has the effect on the game. But but the old man group of Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and Bradley Beal, where we don't even know if Kawhi Leonard's going to be able to play more than 65 games on a consistent basis. Yeah, last year was a breakout year for him, but we don't know how consistent that is. And then you look at Bradley Beal, he's obviously hyper efficient as a third scorer. We saw that with the Phoenix Suns, despite the fact that they were underachieving in his time with them. But he's still an efficient scorer across the board. And James Harden was an all-star last season. But still, this is an aging roster that any day could end up falling off the cliff just simply because they're older. Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, and OG Anunoby, it sounds good. It sounds good, and it is a really solid spot. But I think the Orlando Magic are on par with that. All of this to say that I think if there was 10, if there was, if this team, I mean, if this list, excuse me, went 10 deep instead of 8 deep, I think the Orlando Magic boys should be somewhere on there. I think they actually are deserving of being anywhere as high as 6 or 7. You guys let me know in the comment section down below. Where do you believe? And the trifecta I'm going to use because of the blockbuster aspect of it. The trifecta I'm going to use is Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Desmond Bain. Where do you believe amongst all 30 teams in the NBA that the Orlando Magic's trifecta of Banchero, Wagner, and Bain should be ranked? I believe it should be somewhere between 7 and 10, but you guys let me know. Am I too high or am I too low? Down in the comment section down below. Next, let's transition to something a little bit more lighthearted, but something I can kind of speed through really quickly, which is that Franz Wagner had a really solid game along with a Eurobasket version of Dennis Schroeder, who is like basically overseas Michael Jordan, it seems, when playing for Team Germany, as Wagner dropped 17 points in their second back-to-back win over Team Slovenia. Franz Wagner is playing really well right now, showing off the full package, not necessarily shooting the three ball in an insane way through this handful of games, but definitely getting a lot done. And next to a guy like Dennis Schroeder, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a really solid showing for a guy like Franz to continue to expand his game and build on what should be a really solid offseason of growing as an on-ball threat. I think that Franz Wagner is in a situation right now where we've mentioned on a handful of podcasts, he can be a guy that I feel like can get a lot of simulation of what he can expect going into next season, playing next to Dennis Schroeder and assimilating that with what you get from Jalen Suggs. I think a lot of the things that Jalen Suggs can provide, both as an athlete and as a high level defender, are things that you can get a diet version of from Dennis Schroeder. I think that Jalen Suggs at this stage of his career is a better player than Dennis Schroeder. I also believe that Dennis Schroeder plays a very different style of basketball when he goes overseas the Eurobasket and he is the man. Although Jalen Suggs will not be on ball nearly as much as Dennis Schroeder is, he is equally as good of a ball handler, slasher, and with his three-point ability commands a certain level of respect. maybe even on par with what you could say Dennis Schroeder gets in Eurobasket. Maybe not like exactly bar for bar, but very close in terms of the fact that you have to respect Jalen Suggs' ability to drive the ball and shoot the ball from distance. So he's not a guy you could just slouch off of. You do have to give him his respects on offense. So that gives a lot of opportunity for Franz Wagner to get more on ball reps as a secondary ball handler next to a guy like Jalen Suggs that you can trust to bring the ball up. I think another interesting iteration of this is that the on ball reps with Dennis Schroeder actually probably mimic more of what we will see from Desmond Bane as an on ball threat, because that's going to be a guy that I think is going to get a lot more time to initiate on this team as opposed to even his time with the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think that Franz Wagner learning how to operate, more continuing to learn how to operate as a secondary ball handler and shot creator next to a guy who commands a little bit more on ball juice and has a little bit more on ball usage, a la how Dennis Schroeder has over overseas. I think is going to be a really good way to open up Franz Wagner's game. And little games like these, again, they might not mean a whole lot on the in the grand scheme of things, on an NBA level, but they can be a representation of things that will/could translate when they play on the big stage with the main team, because there's a lot of things that from a tendency perspective can slowly but surely be developed, talking about for Wagner, that can then open up his game more when he plays next to even better talent, a la adding guys like Paulo Banchero, Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, so on and so on to the list. And last but not least, we're going to end with Franz Wagner with some other interesting stuff, being a fake trade scenario that was brought in, that came up with the idea of flipping Franz Wagner to add a little bit of depth, get a draft piece back, and add to the defensive side of the Orlando Magic, given that, you know, they pretty much bolstered their offense by bringing in Desmond Bane, and you still have Paulo Banchero, who's primarily a high-level offensive player. So you have two guys who can already kind of put the ball in the basket to a certain extent. This trade is a scenario by Fadeaway Sports, FadeawayWorld.net, that says the New York Knicks get Franz Wagner for OG Anunoby, Miles McBride, and a 2032 second-round pick. This trade would completely alter the rosters of both teams in the Eastern Conference, so let's dive in and see how it could play out. It says the New York Knicks create a big three to challenge for the Eastern Conference crown. I think that's kind of understood that they would be adding basically Franz Wagner to Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. The main thing that it says is enter Franz Wagner, Orlando's 24-point per game breakout star, named Eastern Conference Reserve in the 2025 All-Star Game. Adding him next to Brunson and Towns would give New York a true big three with length, scoring balance, and finishing prowess, fueled for a long playoff run. Or fueled for long playoff runs. Losing Anunoby and McBride is never ideal for obvious reasons, but it could be a sacrifice that must happen. I'm assuming that also takes into account the fact that Mikal Bridges and Anunoby do overlap a lot in terms of what their playstyles are. And then it says the Orlando Magic retool with a defensive star and six-man scorer. By getting OG Anunoby, that's a lockdown defender, and Miles McBride, who could be a spark energy guy off the bench, averaging nearly 10 points a game in 25 minutes off the bench for the New York Knicks. Swingman depth might resonate with the vision of building around Paulo Banchero and Bane. Anunoby offers elite perimeter defense and has steadily earned his stripes. He's the kind of glue piece that complements Banchero's growing scoring acumen, a strong defensive presence who can guard wings and trust the rotation. Anunoby brings playoff-tested toughness that aligns with Orlando's desire for grit and defensive discipline. Meanwhile, McBride can step into a six-man role, adding the future second-round pick in the deal also helps retain a certain level of flexibility. I'm going to be honest with you. The biggest thing for me is the upside as a two-way player for Franz Wagner makes it where I wouldn't even consider this. OG Anunoby is a really good player, and shout out to Miles McBride, who's grown into his role as a six-man type of guy off the bench for the New York Knicks. I'm not making the Knicks better for OG Anunoby and Miles McBride and a second-round pick. I'm not making the Knicks better And I'm not giving up on a young 24-year-old star who has multiple potential all-star games ahead of him. And a guy who I think as he develops a three-point shot and continues to grow as a defender can be one of these guys that's a mainstay in top 20, top 25 player in the top 20, the top 20, 25 players in the NBA conversations on a season to season basis. This is a guy that I think has way too much upside. And although OG Anunoby is proven in certain slates, including the postseason, I think the upside overall of Franz Wagner outweighs both what OG Anunoby brings to the table and what Miles McBride would be adding in his own right. I thought this was a silly, interesting fake trade, but I thought that it continued to add to what I believe actually is the biggest theme of this episode, which is the snubbing of the Orlando Magic. I think the idea of giving up on Franz Wagner for OG Anunoby and quote unquote leaning into this defensive grit mentality. The Orlando Magic were one of the best defensive units in the NBA without Jalen Suggs on the floor, with Franz Wagner injured, with Paulo Banchero injured last season. This team has been able to establish real defensive identity across the board, kind of regardless of the personnel. So I don't think over-investing into a defensive specialist with a little bit of offensive upside is worth it when Franz Wagner has so much more potential as an on-ball juice guy and a guy who I think can improve as a defender. Will he ever be the lockdown defender that OG Anunoby is? No. But can he be, if not already, an above average defender for the position, considering his size and versatility to guard 1 through 4, I think? Yes. I think that he has the real upside to be a guy that can be scalable, be pliable, and be a dude who can guard across the positional spectrum. Pair that with the fact that I think he has much better on-ball potential than what OG Anunoby has shown in his time with New York or even going back to his time in Toronto. I think that simply overweighs and outmatches anything that the New York Knicks are sending to the Orlando Magic in this fake trade. And I think it's sending the message that the Orlando Magic aren't ready just yet to step into the world of becoming an NBA championship contender the way they view themselves going into this upcoming season by giving up on Franz Wagner right as they just made one of their bigger splash moves. This is a team that does not necessarily trade for quote unquote star talent very often or even high upside talent on a consistent basis. And they took a real swing for the fences and with Desmond Bane. The idea of trading Franz Wagner before even seeing what that looks like or even seeing a full season of it. I don't think this is a trade that should even happen at the trade deadline. To not see a full season of what this could look like, I think is demeaning what the Orlando Magic have become by making these additions this offseason. And I think, excuse me, I think it's also really hurting the overall narrative around the Orlando Magic, which is this team got better. They've already retooled around Paulo Banchero. One could even say they didn't even retool. They actually significantly improved with the things they've done this offseason. So the idea of feeling the need to retool and needing to do so by moving off of Franz Wagner, very disrespectful to Franz Wagner, very disrespectful to what the Orlando Magic have done this offseason. And I think that this trifecta with Wagner, Banchero, and Desmond Bane is worth seeing a year, if not two, of before we start having any conversations around moving off of anybody within that group. But with that being said, this has been another episode of the Magic Latest Podcast. Again, as I said at the top, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn that button from red to gray and join the gang as we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Until next time, I'll see you again to update you with some more Orlando Magic news. But until then, peace.